Chapter 5 begins inside a cafe, with Boris Balkan again being our narrator. While he leads a literary class with his students and friends, Corso returns for a second time days before he departed for Portugal. Balkan and Corso bring up Rochefort, a character from out of the book coming into Corso's life. Balkan explains, Count Rochefort is one of the most important secondary characters in the Three Musketeers, I explained to Corso when he came to see me. He is the Cardinal's agent, a friend of Milady's, and the first enemy that D'Artagnan makes. Rochefort symbolizes the hidden forces, darkness. He is the agent of the satanic conspiracy surrounding D'Artagnan and his friends, of the Cardinal's plot growing in the shadows, threatening their lives. This is when and where Balkan warns the reader that Corso is tying the Nine Gates and the Kingdom of Shadows with the Anjou wine. However, this may be a case of an unreliable narrator. What catches Balkan's eye during his class was a young woman who he describes with her unsettling green eyes. She was wearing a blue duffel coat and carried a pile of books under her arm. Her chestnut hair was cut short, like a boy's. She wore no rings, no watch, no earrings. Her ears weren't pierced. The girl, with the green eyes, keeps her distance. She pays attention when the subject suits her, otherwise she appears uninterested, even mocking Balkan. Corso presses Balkan into stories of Dumas, and if there was any link to black magic or the occult. Balkan empathically denies this, even though there were scandalous rumors with Dumas and his last mistress, Ada Isaacs-Menken. Balkan notes Corso's slowly evolving obsession. None of this information was obviously related to the Dumas manuscript, but Corso noted it down as if his life depended on it. Balkan also drops an important clue to the reader, easily overlooked, easily forgotten. At that time, I knew all the facts about the Anjou wine, even certain keys to the mystery of which Corso was unaware. But I had no idea of the complex implications that the Nine Gates would have for this story. An unreliable narrator he is. This scene in the novel is reminiscent to Balkan's opening in The Ninth Gate. The girl is in the room, uninterested in Balkan's lecture, and only has an eye for Corso. Because The Ninth Gate is a story without the Anjou wine, Dean Corso literally has nothing to say here. Rather being an expert in Dumas and the Three Musketeers, Balkan is an expert in medieval witchcraft. I now move once more into the background as the near-omniscient narrator of Corso's adventures. In this way, with the information Corso later confided to me, the tragic events that followed can be put into some sort of order. Balkan steps back from his first-person narration in the middle of the chapter. Corso returns home, where a concierge tells him that he let in a television repairman to fix his TV. The funny thing is, Corso doesn't own a television. He finds his place looking untouched. He was relieved when he opened the door. There were no papers strewn on the floor, no open drawers, not even armchairs slashed with knives. It was all tidy, just as he'd left it in the early afternoon. However, not all is well. Corso recognized his computer was accessed, and not by him. In an ashtray next to it was a butt from a Havana cigar. The brand? Monte Cristo, naturally. Corso didn't feel too threatened as he keeps the Anjou wine and the Nine Gates safe at Makarova's bar. And this is where the final segment of the 5th chapter takes us. Bernie and Corso meet again there, and Bernie says he got an unexpected visit from a plumber and more unexpected phone calls in the middle of the night. The harassment doesn't move Bernie from his promise, and he'll stick to the plan of selling the Anjou wine on the open market. Some similarities with the film include Corso's home being ransacked, the same assumed with Bernie's bookstore. Also, Corso uses another place to stash his manuscripts and books safe. Finding a cigarette butt is also carried over to the Ninth Gate, but for entirely different reasons. It belonged to Liana. It's a little devil cigarette and not a Monte Cristo, and it's not deliberately left behind as an inside joke. The book goes a little deeper into the legalities of how Bernie got the hold of the Anjou wine from Telfer. Bernie shared that he made up a story to Liana, that he signed a contract with Corso and couldn't just sell it back to her. All lies, of course, so Bernie could get a dinner date out of Liana. Corso retorts, "You're a dirty, lying bastard."
He said you're a double-dealing, money-grubbing bastard.
The chapter closes with Bernie giving Corso his cigar butt, left behind at his place, a Monte Cristo. Now, Corso has a pair. The wooden sign, cracked, faded with age and mildew, hung in a window thick with dust. The Ceniza brothers' workshop was on the mezzanine floor of an old four-story building, shored up at the back, on a shady street in the old quarter of Madrid. This is where Corso visits the Ceniza brothers for their advice and consultation. This is not his first visit with the Cenizas, who both, the book stated, look very much alike. Corso shows the brothers his copy of the Nine Gates, and they admit seeing it before, when they were paid to restore and clean it. The Cenizas take Corso back into their workshop and talk at great lengths how difficult, near impossible in fact, to forge a book of such age and notoriety. They do, however, point out a little detail. The engravings have two initials, one by the artist and another who engraved them, and two of them were designed by someone initialed LF. The Ceniza brothers are someone I've discussed in a video before. My impressions were based on the film, obviously, and the screenplay that included information never revealed in the movie. The two renditions, book versus film, are as similar as they are unalike. In the screenplay, it was written that Ceniza's workshop was in Toledo, not Madrid. The two brothers, Pablo and Pedro, were identical twins in the film, as both characters were played by the same actor, José López Rodero. To play up the theme of copies, Rodero also played both workmen when Corso returns at the end of the film. Each pair of twins look similar, are similar, but have subtle qualities that set them apart. The book, for example, reads, "They had the same large nose, identical ears stuck to their skulls, and sparse hair combed straight back. The only noticeable differences between them were that Pablo, the younger of the two, was taller and quieter." The book invests a great deal of time into the processes of creating and distinguishing an original from a forgery. Somewhere buried in the text, do Corso and the brothers bring up the idea of forging just a single page. Without fault, the book explains how difficult that would be too. The film is much more subtle and efficient. There is a lot more show than tell, an advantage a film has over a book. There are tools and equipment that shows, if we care to look, how to make a book look antiquated. The Cenizas do not just work copies, they live it. Another change the film made to simplify things. It depicted each engraving with one initial, not the two the book described. Another little change the film had from the Club Dumas, it is clear the Cenizas were the prior owners of the book before selling it to Telfer. They admit getting their literal hands on it, but never admit to modifying it. A similar but different take from the book, where the brothers admit working on it but never owned it. One last difference. The brothers' last words in the book are, "That printer might have been the one burned at the stake, but he wasn't the only one involved." "No," agreed his brother, "somebody helped light the fire at his feet." Whereas in the film,
"Even hell has its heroes, senor."
Chapter 6 jumps from the Ceniza brothers' workshop to Corso's home, where Liana pays an unexpected visit. She wants to make a trade for the Anjou wine, and she's not paying in cash. Corso goes through with the transaction. When they finish, Corso refuses to hand over the Anjou wine. In her wrath, Liana hits Corso across the ear, grabs the manuscript before breaking a bottle and threatens to stab him with it. Corso counterpunches, and he subdues Liana to the couch. Liana warns, "They'll kill you for this, Corso." Back to the film, where the story begins in New York, Liana pays Corso a visit before he leaves for Spain and the Ceniza brothers. Liana is there to negotiate for the book by seducing him. While the film exposes Liana's tattoo, she has a different one in the book, and it's located elsewhere, not yet mentioned. Her being fully clothed wasn't about the film rating, it's taken from the novel. The scene is parallel to the book, even down to Liana attacking Corso with a bottle. She doesn't come away with the book either, but that's because Corso had it stashed at Bernie's place. There is, however, one little character trait the book adds and movie hints at, maybe. Liana notices that Corso doesn't have any pictures or photographs in his home. Corso gives a terse answer. It's a little peek inside his character that I describe as a little bit misanthropic. The film, kind of through its set design shows, Corso is a man who lives for himself. He does have a frame here and there, but at a distance, it's difficult to make out what it is. Except maybe this one. Who knows, is this a random picture? Maybe a relative? It could even be a little nod to Nikon. The chapter closes with Corso pouring himself a glass of gin. He thinks about what just happened. Whether or not Liana was still in the room is rather unclear. It wasn't just a scene out of a book. It was ripped from The Three Musketeers, page 129. There, among overturned furniture, leaping from the bed, dagger in hand like a furious demon, Milady throws herself at D'Artagnan, who retreats, terrified, in his shirt, keeping her at bay with the tip of his sword. Chapter 7 begins with Corso's journey to Portugal to meet a well-known character from the film, Victor Fargas. But we start with the train, and yes, like the film, this is where Corso and the girl will first speak to each other. However, before we get there in the book, Corso will spot her at the train platform and bumps into her while she rests her bare feet up on a seat. Sitting in his cramped compartment, Corso pulls out a book out of his canvas bag to read. It's not the Nine Gates, it's not the Anjou wine. Instead, it's the Memorial of St. Helena. The Memorial of St. Helena was written by Emmanuel de las Casas, detailing the intimate conversations of Napoleon Bonaparte during his exile. It covered his life, political philosophy, and the conditions of his exile. With a first-hand account of Napoleon's thoughts on his career, his rise and fall, and his legacy, the work was designed to rehabilitate Napoleon's image, portraying him as a misunderstood figure of enlightenment, rather than a tyrant. It was published in 1823 after Napoleon's death. How this is related to the Club Dumas, I have two theories. First, it continues telling the story of Corso's French lineage. Somehow, Napoleon's struggles at Waterloo parallels Corso's struggles. The other, more abstract and is a reach, is an analogy of an historic and legendary figure that was cast out in exile from his empire. After spending time at the dining car before it closed for the night, Corso was on his way back to his compartment when he saw the girl in the corridor of the first-class carriage. She had opened the window, and the cold night air was blowing against her face. As he came up to her, he turned sideways so he could get past. She turned toward him. "I know you," she said. Corso and the girl exchange a few words. The girl tells him that she's a student, sort of. When asked for her name, she answers Irene Adler. Corso sees a cheap paperback next to her shoes on the floor, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Irene Adler is a fictional character in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories. Irene Adler only appears in one original story, but is mentioned in a few others. She is the only woman to have outsmarted the legendary detective. Adapted in many derivative works over the years, it comes at the expense of reinterpreting her character contrary to Doyle's canon. Corso knows she's being coy. He tells Irene Adler, "I am Corso, the man who runs." The girl retorts, "You don't look like a man who runs anywhere. You seem the quiet type." The two exchange a few words about the niceties of traveling by train. Soon they say their goodbyes. The film is very faithful to the book and the scene's narrative. It's also very efficient. For instance, we don't need to see the girl twice before Corso bumps into her in the train's corridor. Aside from the B-roll establishing shot, Corso begins the scene in the dining car doing his homework. He bumps into the girl in the corridor rather than near the seats, as written in the book. But it is Corso who starts the conversation.
I've seen you before.
Have you?
Yes.
Corso stays in the sleeper car in the book too, but the film has the girl come out and says she travels on the cheap. In the book, Irene is more subtle about her finances. This may be why Corso guesses she's a student.
You're a student?
Something like that. I like trains.
Since The Ninth Gate isn't a love letter to classic literature, the girl gets another pseudonym.
What's your name?
Guess.
Green eyes?
That'll do.
Both the book and film references where the two first seen each other, the cafe versus Balkan's lecture hall. Rather than spending time over the nostalgia of train travel, Corso name drops Balkan and elevates him as the micromanaging oppressor. However, it's curious that in The Ninth Gate, the girl sounds like she's unfamiliar with Balkan.
Well, give my regards to Balkan. Tell him I'm doing my best.
Balkan?
The book and film close the scene with the girl hoping to bump into Corso in the future. He took a few steps, knowing that she was watching him. "Maybe we'll see each other around," she said behind him. Maybe.
See you around? Maybe.
We're not finished with the chapter. Corso makes it to Sintra, Portugal. After checking in at the hotel, he takes a horse-drawn carriage to the Fargus estate. The estate is in disrepair. Ignored and not maintained, its landscaping overrun. Corso has an appointment with Victor Fargus, right in the middle of his ritual. Fargus is described as tall and thin as an El Greco figure. He seemed to move around inside his loose, thick woolen sweater and baggy trousers like a tortoise in its shell. His mustache was trimmed with geometrical precision, and his old-fashioned, worn-out shoes gleamed. Fargus was in the middle of deciding which of his precious collection to sacrifice. His means of living depends on selling off choice selections from his book collection to pay the estate taxes. He stares at his beloved books and painfully chooses which one to sacrifice, like a father sacrificing a child. Sometimes it takes him 2 full months to decide what will be lost to the tax collector. Corso was invited inside into the heart of the Fargus library, once 5,000 large, with books on the floor, lined up neatly on old, faded, threadbare rugs, as far away as possible from the windows and the leaden light coming through them, lay a great many books. 500 or more, Corso estimated, maybe even 1,000. Fargus tells Corso, "That's life, my friend, but I have to say, in my defense, that they are all in immaculate condition. I clean them and make sure they're aired. I check that insects or rodents don't get at them, and that they're protected against light, heat, and moisture. In fact, I do nothing else all day." Corso shows the Borja copy of The Nine Gates, and Fargus makes his comment. "It's complete and in good condition," said Fargus, correctly interpreting the look on Corso's face. "It's been out in the world for 3.5 centuries, but when you open it, it looks as fresh as the day it came off the press, as if the printer made a pact with the devil." Fargus ensures the authenticity of the book. He makes it clear. He doesn't believe in such nonsense.
Victor Fargus is an unbeliever.
We see much of this scene in the book, is in the film, but not everything. There is the run-down estate that would have been otherwise impressive. The Fargus collection is displayed humbly.
But I keep them in perfect condition, safe from damp, light, heat, rats. I dust and air them every day.
The two even share a glass of brandy. The novel explains how Fargus, who is depicted as willingly destitute, came about his book collection. "I inherited all this part of the collection from my grandfather. He was a devotee of the Hermetic arts and astrology, and he was a Mason." The Freemasons are part of a fan theory that crops up here and there. Some believed it was an important element of the film that opened more secrets than the Nine Gates itself. I've brought this subject up in an earlier video about Andrew Telfer that YouTube deemed economically unworthy, so I'm dropping the subject. Comparing a book to a film, sometimes they both can say the same things, but in different ways. In The Ninth Gate, Fargus doesn't waste time and tells Corso without asking if he'd ever give up the book.
Not that I would ever sell this one. Not at any price.
The book version of Fargus, where we realize he'd never part with it, takes the line and spins it into something about Borja. A specialist in demonology, isn't he? A very rich book collector. He's been after that 9 gates you've got there for years. He's always been prepared to pay any price. We feel Fargus's emotional connection to his collection. Not just the 9 gates of the Kingdom of Shadows, but all his books. This is his life, and loses another piece of his soul each time he loses a book. Here is when he mentions his violin. I take up the violin that you see there, and I play for hours, wandering through the house in darkness, like one of the damned. Corso asks 2 things of Fargus. The first is to make an offer for Borja to purchase his copy at a lofty sum. This rattles and insults Fargus. After it's diplomatically brushed aside, Corso requests to compare the 2 copies for differences. Fargus accommodates and gives Corso access to a smaller room, which had a dilapidated piano in one corner, a table with an old bronze candelabrum covered with wax drips, and a couple of rickety chairs. Alone, meticulously comparing the 2, Corso discovers the riddle within the copies of the book. The chapter ends on a cliffhanger. Overlooked for centuries, Corso discovers the initials on some of the specific engravings are different from one copy of the 9 gates to the other. He writes up a matrix of his differences and is just itching to get his hand on the 3rd copy. But first, Corso wants to take Fargus's copy for himself and his master, Varro Borja. Corso had to devise a plan to acquire it by means that were not conventional. Leaving the Fargus estate, the mustache man, the Rochefort look-alike, drives up in his car and asks for a match to light his Monte Cristo cigar. The mysterious man, a cigar smoker who doesn't carry a lighter, drives off. A smoker of Monte Cristo cigars, a smoker without a lighter. Corso swore gently under his breath. He'd have given a rare incunabulum in good condition to punch the face of whoever was writing this ridiculous script. Returning to his hotel, Corso gets on the phone. He leaves a message for Borja. Bernie didn't pick up, and he called a 3rd person who would arrive shortly later. However, somebody else catches Corso's attention. The first thing Corso saw, as he pushed open the door of the small hotel lounge, was the girl. It couldn't be anyone else, her cropped hair giving her a boyish look, her skin as tanned as if it were August. She sat in an armchair, reading in the cone of light from a lamp, her legs stretched out and crossed on the chair opposite. In their small talk, we get more clues who the girl is. She tells Corso she'd been traveling for ages. Corso mentions how she sometimes changes her expression as if she was older than she actually looks. The girl replies, "Maybe I am." The girl holds a book in her hand, Melmoth the Wanderer, by Charles Maturin. Melmoth the Wanderer is a Gothic novel exploring themes of despair, temptation, and the supernatural through the lens of its major characters. At the center is John Melmoth, a young Irishman who inherits his uncle's property and uncovers a dark family legacy linked to the mysterious figure of Melmoth the Wanderer, a cursed ancestor doomed to wander the earth for 150 years in vain attempts to seduce souls to Satan. Up to this point, the chapter plays much of the same beats as seen in The Ninth Gate. In fact, we can point to the scene in the film where Chapter 8 begins. Corso discovers the differences and writes up a matrix. There's even an unspoken reference to Fargus's violin. Corso leaves the estate and bumps into the mustache man. But the mustache man doesn't want a match and is out to hurt him. And the girl doesn't show up in a motorbike to save Corso either. That's just in the film. Corso taking notice of the girl from outside the lounge is also taken from the book, but their conversation is very short. According to the screenplay, instead of reading Melmoth the Wanderer, the girl is reading The Devil in Love by Jacques Cazot. The Devil in Love is a story of a young Spanish nobleman who summons the devil out of curiosity. Falling in love with the Spaniard, the devil takes the form of a beautiful woman who attempts but fails to seduce him. However, in the film, Roman Polanski chose How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. You might think this would be appropriate reading material for a strange wanderer posing as a sometime student, but there is a more dark, more sinister backstory. But I'll have you do your own research. In the film, Corso steps away to speak with Balkan. In the book, he steps away to speak with Amilcar Pinto. Pinto is a new character to the story. Pinto is a policeman, a very dishonest policeman with a history of profiteering stolen books with Corso in the past. Corso wants Pinto to quietly break into Fargus's home and take the book, making sure the old man is unharmed, of course. Corso also takes the opportunity to ask Pinto to look into who the Mustache Man is. Like the film, Corso will take a call from his benefactor. It's Borja in the book, Balkan in the movie. Corso shares the news of the discrepancies between the books. Balkan wants the book, as does Borja. Except in the book, Corso has a plan. In the film, you can almost hear Balkan's quiet thoughts.
The old man wouldn't sell it to save his life. He said as much. Did he?
Hello? This is your friend from last night. Remember? Irene Adler. I'm in the lobby. We have to talk. Now. The girl wakes Corso in the early morning. She begins with a phone call before showing up at his door, insisting he returns to the Fargus estate with her. The book doesn't explain how, but Corso and Irene Adler arrive at the estate. The dead leaves crackled beneath their feet as they pushed the iron gate and walked up the path lined with broken statues and empty pedestals. The gray morning light cast no shadows, and above the stone staircase, the sundial still showed no time. Stepping inside through a window, the girl doesn't share where Fargus is at when Corso asks. Instead, she just plays with the violin.
Does whatever a spider can.
Looking for the Fargus copy of the Nine Gates, Corso spots a gap among the collection where the book should have been. Corso immediately realizes the book had been taken. Much happened too fast, and Corso thinks about Pinto and his request to break in and take the Fargus book. It couldn't have been Pinto. He wouldn't have had time to organize anything. It was then Corso noticed the fireplace and a leather-bound book smoldering in the ashes. The 3 known copies of the 9 Gates of the Kingdom of Shadows were down to 2. The girl tells Corso there's still time to catch the next flight to Paris, and she's coming to protect him. But first, where was Fargus? She took a moment to answer, still absorbed, lost. At last, she indicated with her chin. Over there. Corso followed the direction of her gaze. In the pond, beneath the thread of water from the mouth of the mutilated angel with empty eyes, Corso saw the vague outline of a man floating face down among the water lilies and dead leaves. Movie adaptations have the luxury of telling the same story, but in different ways than the source material. The 9th Gate is no exception. Corso's second visit to Fargus in the book and film share the same highlights. The girl wakes up Corso in the early morning. The book is found burning in the fireplace. Fargus's body is discovered in his pond. And the girl will join Corso to his next destination, Paris. But the film doesn't need to have the girl both call and show up at his door. In fact, the phone is off the hook. Now, the screenplay does hint the girl tried to call him, but the film just dropped that line altogether. It's the girl who finds a way into the house with a technique that gets seen again later. While the violin doesn't make a cameo appearance, the drinking glass does. While not much is said in the film,
What handsome glasses.
They're the only ones I have left.
the Club Dumas notes how Corso makes polite small talk about glassware. Nice glass, Corso said to make conversation. Fargus agreed and made a gesture halfway between resignation and self-mockery, suggesting a different reading of it all. The glass, the tiny amount of brandy in the bottle, the bare house, his own presence, an elegant, pale, worn ghost. I have only one more left, he confided in a calm, neutral tone. That's why I take care of them. This little piece of information was left out of the film, but gives this moment a sadder tone, knowing what the book had written about it. Another difference, and I think an improvement over the book, is in the Club Duma, the girl comes out and tells Corso that Fargus is dead at his hotel room door. Obviously, this removed all mystery when walking through the estate. This may be a play to make us think about Pinto and whether or not Corso's devious plan took a wrong turn. But the story is complicated enough. Speaking of Fargus, the book doesn't mention the bottle of brandy floating next to his body. It's something just in the movie and likely put there as a final message to top off or end Fargus's life with. It's the unspoken equivalent to the drinking glasses, but there is something in the book, a quote from Fargus, that was an uneasy hint of things to come. Fargus says to Corso, "You have a saying in Spain, if all is lost, we may as well jump in the river." And this concludes chapters 5 through 8 in my breakdown of the Club Duma by Arturo Perez-Reverte. Please consider a like, share, or subscribe if you enjoy this content. You can feed the algorithmic monster by commenting below more chapters. You can catch the previous installment here and the next one too when it's available. This is Mr. G of Synergy saying, thanks for watching.